I went to the door to pay the little kid $10 for mowing the lawn, and there's blood all over the door. Nobody comes through the door.
I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like this Shasta, and we're not sure. You know, I don't know.
It's just awfully weird to me. The girl looks exactly like the little girl.
Shasta Groene was only 8 years old when, back in 2005, she was rescued from infamous serial killer Joseph Duncan III, also known as Joseph Edward Duncan, making her the sole survivor of the gut-wrenching Idaho murder and kidnapping case. How was she taken? What really transpired within the 7 weeks that she was trapped in his clutches? And who was the monster Joseph Duncan III? This is the case of Shasta Groene. On the 16th of May 2005, authorities made a shocking discovery in a house along Lake Coeur d'Alene, outside the city of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The bodies of 40-year-old Brenda Groene, her boyfriend, 37-year-old Mark McKenzie, and her son, 13-year-old Slade Groene, were all found in their home, bound and dead. The cause? Blunt trauma to the head. However, that wasn't the only harrowing discovery they made. Two of Brenda's other children, 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta Groene, were missing. The culprit nowhere to be found. An Amber Alert was issued and searchers combed the area for the missing children. At that point, no one knew that the children would only be found over 2 months later, one alive and one dead. The nightmare began one day before, the 15th of May 2005. It was nighttime in the Groene home, but Shasta couldn't go to sleep. She thought she saw someone hiding in her bedroom closet in her Wolf Lodge, Idaho home, and the sight terrified her. Her brother wasn't worried at all. After all, children sometimes imagine monsters in their closet. He comforted her, and she fell asleep right after that, believing that she'd imagined it. However, there was an actual monster in her closet, and his name was Joseph Duncan III. From a young age, Joseph Edward Duncan III was a sick human being. At only 15 years old, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for assaulting a boy and, after being released, ended up in prison again for violating his parole. During those years before violating his parole, he'd murdered 3 other people, but no one would discover this until during his incarceration for the Idaho murder and kidnapping case. The next time Shasta woke up was at 6 a.m. on the 16th to her mother crying. My mother was crying. She's like, "Shasta, you need to wake up. Someone is in the house." When she left the bedroom with her mother and went into the living room, she saw a man standing there armed with a shotgun, wearing all black and night vision goggles. That man was Edward Duncan III, and the goggles earned him the nickname the Night Vision Serial Killer. Duncan was standing over her stepfather and brother, who were laying face down on the floor of the family living room. There were zip ties around their wrists and ankles, and duct tape covered their mouths. He also tied her mother's hands with nylon zip ties. Shasta and Dylan were removed from the house and placed outside on the lawn.
He grabbed me, picked me up, and took me into the backyard and laid me under the tree next to my brother.
While they were outside, Shasta heard multiple thumping sounds coming from inside the home. Duncan was in the process of bludgeoning the rest of her family to death, and that became evident to her when an injured Slade staggered away from the entrance to the home. After Duncan was done murdering her family, he placed Shasta and Dylan in a stolen Jeep Cherokee. Shasta and Dylan were taken to a campsite in Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana, where he kept them for 2 weeks, molesting and torturing them.
He took more of his anger out on Dylan and was really mean to him.
He would abuse him and then make me watch. And then if I cried, then he would abuse him worse.
According to Shasta, they were driven a long distance and stayed in 2 different campsites, where Duncan didn't hesitate in telling her that he'd beaten her family members to death with a hammer.
He grabbed the hammer and he said, "See this hammer? This is the hammer that I murdered your mom and your stepdad and your brother with." And he was like, "They're not alive and you're never gonna see them again."
Duncan would play mind games with them, telling them that he would let them go if they did what he asked. He made Shasta and Duncan write letters to their families, claiming that he could deliver them when they were released.
"Dear Dad, I miss you very much, and me and Dylan know what happened to Mom, Mark, and Slade, and we both feel very sorry for them, and we both miss you and Jesse and Vance, and we might see you guys again."
After seeing what he'd done to her family and the hell he'd put her and Dylan through, Shasta was under no impression that Duncan would let them go, but she would tell Dylan there was still hope to comfort him.
I said, "I promise that we're gonna make it out alive." That was my way of comforting my brother, just letting him know that we would never stop fighting.
However, everything changed after she watched Duncan murder Dylan. It happened 2 weeks after Duncan had kidnapped them. Shasta was standing at the side of Duncan's Jeep, holding Dylan's hand when she heard a loud boom. His hand slipped from hers and Dylan fell to the ground screaming. Duncan claimed that he'd killed the boy by accident. Apparently, he was looking for a beer in a clear plastic box when the shotgun he kept in the same box went off, and the bullet hit Dylan in the stomach. He then put the shotgun to Dylan's head and pulled the trigger, but the gun did not go off. He reloaded the gun while Dylan lay on the ground begging for his life. However, Duncan mercilessly put the gun to the boy's head again and killed him. Afterwards, Duncan started crying and telling her that he'd only murdered her brother to put him out of his misery.
I couldn't even say anything. Like, I couldn't scream. I just didn't even know what to do. He came up to me and was crying. He said it was an accident. He didn't mean to. I didn't know what the first shot was, but I knew that the second time was on purpose. He said that he did it so that Dylan wouldn't have to feel pain.
At this point, the only out that Shasta could see from their nightmare was through deception, so she had started lying to Duncan. She would tell him that she cared for him, wanted to be with him, and didn't want to escape.
I would ask questions about his life, ask him about his family, and could I meet them one day?
It was a conscious thing, like, I need to make him think that I love him or that I want to be here with him.
Her attempts seemed to be working, and it gave Dylan and her much hope. However, watching Duncan kill Dylan shattered her. Duncan forced her to help move Dylan's body onto a tarp where he burned it. It was just her and the family who'd murdered her entire family now, and a fresh wave of determination washed over Shasta. She would escape his clutches and get justice for her family. Days after killing Dylan, Duncan asked Shasta, "How do you want to die? You have two choices. I can strangle you to death or I can shoot you like your brother." Shasta couldn't picture the same thing that happened to her brother happening to her. The idea terrified her. Also, if she was strangled, she believed she had the opportunity to talk him out of it. Shooting her, on the other hand, would mean he could just pull the trigger and it would all be over.
He was like, just like, you have the choice to be strangled or you have the choice to be shot like your brother, and that one's gonna be quicker. I felt like if I had chose the strangulation, that I might have a chance to talk him out of what he was doing.
Duncan lay her down and put a rope around her neck. Miraculously, what saved the 8-year-old's life was a stray plea she uttered using the monster's nickname, Jet.
I noticed that when I would use that name with him, it would like soften a little bit, like it would soften him. And he's like, "What did you say?" He started crying and he was like, "I can't do this."
According to Shasta, he was like, "I don't know why, but when you call me that, I can tell that you really care about me." At that point, I knew that I had gained a lot of trust with him. I was pretty much gonna do whatever it took to survive.
Going home was brought up. I would tell him, "No, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you." He'd be like, "Really?" You could tell that it was starting to catch him off guard a little bit.
Shasta continued to manipulate Duncan into thinking she didn't want to leave his side. She would tell him that she wanted to show him all the places she grew up in and where she went to school because she loved school. She told him she'd show him where she used to hang out and her life because she had no family. Her tactics worked. Shasta's supposed admiration of him made Duncan feel like she trusted him and that he was getting to know a vulnerable part of her.
He basically sat me down and asked if I would be his kid and I would stay with him, that I would call him Dad.
He's like, "I want to take you to meet my mom. Would you meet her?" And I had said yes.
She kept doing this until her chance finally came.
And I said, "Can you take me to where I grew up? Like, I want to show you where I went to school. And I want to show you where my best friend lives. Like, I want to show you all these places that are important to me because you're important to me." And he was like, "Yeah, of course, I would love to."
On July 2nd, 2005, she managed to convince Duncan to take her to a restaurant. He took her to a Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene. When they got there, Shasta pretended to be his daughter, but she knew she had to find a way out. She looked up and saw a random man looking back at her. It was then that she realized he knew who she actually was and that the man with her was not her father.
As I was walking in, I noticed that my missing persons poster was right there. There was this guy standing outside and he was with his friends and he nodded his head and I nodded my head and he went up to the counter and made it kind of seem like he was conversating with one of the waitresses, and then I seen her look over at me.
The man alerted a waitress.
They were my only table at the time and I immediately recognized her. His entire world revolved around her. She didn't speak without his permission. There was something just not okay.
The police were finally called.
I've got a little girl here with a tall gentleman, and she looks so much like this Shasta, and we're not sure. I don't know.
The waitress and the man weren't the only ones that recognized Shasta. Others did too. The problem was that Duncan was ready to leave, and if he set foot outside that restaurant, who knew when the next time Shasta would be found? The waitress pretended to have problems printing the check, and others waited at alert to stop him at the door just in case. Finally, The nightmare was over. The police arrived and arrested Duncan on the spot. Although Shasta had lost everything, she was finally saved.
The whole entire restaurant started clapping. Like, they all knew who I was. They all knew that I was a missing person, and like it was kind of like they all played a factor into my rescue.
Shasta told the police about Duncan murdering her family and kidnapping her and her brother before killing him too. After searching Duncan's stolen Jeep, they found a shotgun and video recordings of Dylan and Shasta in captivity. The police had their guy. But there was still one question left. Where did he hide Dylan's body? 2 days later, on the 4th of July 2005, investigators found human remains at a remote makeshift campsite in the Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana. After DNA analysis, the remains were positively identified as those of Dylan Groene. Shasta was later sent to live with her biological father. Understandably, she continued to be haunted by the past and took a year off of school. She went to therapy but suffered from an eating disorder and also indulged in self-harm. As for Joseph Edward Duncan III, the Night-Vision Killer, he was sentenced to death in 2008 for the murder and kidnapping of the Groene family. He was also serving 11 consecutive sentences of life without parole in conjunction with the same crimes, as well as the 1997 murder of Anthony Martinez of Beaumont, California. He died in March 2021 at age 58 of stage 4 brain cancer, his death being a final offering of peace to Shasta.